This is awesome. Let's be honest, it's almost impossible not to enjoy some good old ninja shenanigans. Whether you grew up with black and white movies from the mid-1900s, video games from the 1980s, or 2000s anime, these sneaky assassins dressed in black and otherwise known as Shinobi were probably at least a small part of your childhood. It's incredible to think that Japan has not one, but two extremely marketable types of historic warriors to draw inspiration from, with not only the cunning ninja, but also the samurai and his unwavering honor, who in some ways still serves as somewhat of a role model to the people of Japan. The samurai is also steeped in tradition and history that goes back almost as far as the history of Japan itself. But what about the ninja? I mean, we've fully accepted that the guy can disappear in a cloud of smoke and turn into a toad using some kind of magic hand signs. But rarely do we ever think about how much of this stuff was actually real. Spoilers, the toad magic probably wasn't. Now, just like with the samurai, a fair amount of exaggeration and romanticization is to be expected. But the ninja might take this to a whole nother level. So much so that perhaps we will have to ask ourselves the question: is the ninja nothing more than an invention? A complete figment of our imagination? The short answer is, yeah, kind of. The long answer, well, that is exactly what you're gonna get by watching this video. Today, we will take a deep dive into the possible origins of the ninja, and with that into Japanese history itself, exploring the beginnings of secret warfare in Japan, what the words shinobi and ninja might have to do with it, how two small regions in western Japan became the supposed home of shinobi history, and how the shinobi, along with all of his trademark tools and weapons and magic hand signs, truly transformed into the ninja that we are so fascinated with these days. If you end up enjoying today's video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want more videos like this popping up in your feed in the future. Also, check out my Patreon link below if you feel like helping me out even more. I'd really appreciate it. But for now, it's time to get into some history. These are the origins and the history of the ninja. Beyond his iconic black garb, his arsenal of curious weapons and tools, and the use of mystifying hand signs, the image of the ninja is forever tied to one thing: the art of stealth. But to truly understand where these masters of stealth, also known as shinobi, originated, there is no better place to start than by looking at the history of secret warfare in Japan, which goes back at least 1,000 years. While the earliest recorded spy missions in Japan from as far back as the 7th century AD involved foreign spies, it is the Shomonki Chronicle from the 10th century AD that introduces us to the first recorded Japanese spy and spy mission. It was the story of a man named Koharumaru, who embarked on a daring mission for his lord: to infiltrate the headquarters of legendary samurai Taira no Masakado and map out its layout. Koharumaru met an untimely death when he was found out by the enemy, but he certainly earned himself a name in the history books. Another important spy mission is said to have taken place during the Genpei War of the late 12th century. This time it is a chronicle titled Asuma Kagami, which claims that during this pivotal war, Minamoto Yoritomo, who was destined to be Japan's first ever shogun, enlisted the help of a certain Kunimichi in order to carry out the task of information gathering and the surveillance of his enemy's residence. As you can see, the thread of secret warfare weaves itself through the fabric of Japanese history, with these early spies acting as a fascinating bridge to the now iconic shinobi, the stealthy assassins who, like the samurai, are usually seen as uniquely Japanese in their methods. But interestingly, the spark that ignited the use of spies by Yoritomo and his predecessors wasn't purely homegrown. Instead, it stemmed from a document from a cultural powerhouse of a country that has long shaped Japan in so many ways: China. When it comes to military strategy, Sun Tzu's The Art of War is widely regarded as one of the most impactful pieces of literature ever created. But actually, the battlefield was viewed by Sun Tzu as somewhat of a last resort, and according to Tzu, in order to avoid the battlefield as much as possible, it is of utmost importance to gather insider information and cause division within the enemy's ranks. Sun Tzu outlined 5 different categories of spies crucial in order to achieve this, and it is with one of these that the shinobi are now most closely associated with. The Shūriken, or living agents, skilled operatives who bravely venture into enemy territory to gather vital intel for their lords, even at the risk of their own lives. Uncovering the roots of our beloved ninjas seems like a pretty straightforward affair so far. Obviously, they must be the descendants of these highly skilled living agents that have served the warlords of Japan for hundreds of years. But in reality, finding a definitive answer to the question of where the ninja came from, or what they actually are, is not that easy. Even the word shinobi itself tends to spark debate among historians and ninja enthusiasts alike. Take for example the book that has served as the main source for this video, written by British author and historian Stephen Turnbull, who dedicated more than a few pages to just explaining the meaning and historic use of the many iterations of the word ninja, and especially shinobi. For your and my own sanity, I will refrain from going into that much detail, but the least I can do is give you an abridged explanation. The word ninja is written as a combination of these 2 kanji letters, pronounced as nin and either sha or ja. The second kanji is easily explained. In this case, it is perhaps best translated as practitioner. It is the first kanji seen here that has caused many debates over the years, because while the character nin does have the secondary meaning of secrecy, to spy or to sneak, a perfect match for our ninja, its main definition is actually that of endurance. According to many historians and many ninja history skeptics, this is actually not as trivial as it may seem. But moving on. The word shinobi utilizes the same nin kanji, alternatively pronounced here as shino, with the sound b attached to it in hiragana form. This reading, in many different versions like the often used Shinobi no Mono, was actually the only confirmed reading that could be encountered in secret warfare and shinobi-related texts all the way up until the 20th century. The reason why the aforementioned book goes into an insane amount of detail regarding the word shinobi especially is the fact that there is a slight yet very important difference between whether the word shinobi is used in historical texts in its adverbial form or as a noun, which can oftentimes give an indication on whether the person described was actually a dedicated master of stealth missions, or just a person not necessarily specialized in the field carrying out this sort of task. The first noteworthy appearance of the word shinobi in a historic document can be found in the 14th century Taiheki Chronicle, which according to some historians makes this possibly the first true shinobi mission in recorded history. A passage of the Taiheki talks about a group of raiders described as Ichimotsu no Shinobi, which could be translated as first-rate shinobi or talented shinobi, who in the cover of night, wind and rain, infiltrated and set fire to a shrine in the enemy's territory, creating panic and chaos among enemy ranks. This is a very important piece to the puzzle that is the history of the shinobi, mainly because the word shinobi is linked for the first time in history to a mission that totally fits in with what the shinobi are thought to have specialized in: infiltrating enemy lines and either gathering information or causing chaos and confusion. Today's image of the ninja or shinobi consists of more than just that of sneaky information gatherers or troublemakers, of course, because it's not rare to see them portrayed as professional thieves or even assassins, in a way putting them into an entirely different category than the soldiers employed by samurai lords that we just heard about. Basically, it is sometimes suggested that the roots of the ninja lie not necessarily with an elite of Japanese secret warfare, but with lower-class criminals. An interesting idea that leads us to yet another chronicle, the 14th century Mineaiki, which contains a very interesting section dedicated to criminal activities at the time. Quote, "Various kinds of disturbing events occurred around the eras of Shoan and Kengen, with rebellions, coastal piracy, raids, robbery, mountain banditry, pillaging, and so on happening all over the place. They disguised themselves in an unusual way by wearing yellowish-brown clothes and a ropogasa hat like a woman's instead of an eboshi, and not showing their faces. Individuals who congregated in groups of between 10 and 20 men wore swords that had no ornamentation, with rough quivers on their backs and bamboo poles for spears, and neither helmet nor armor. They withdrew to castles and took on their enemies there, or they won over an enemy but then betrayed him, committing themselves to nothing. They were fond of gaming and gambling, and they behaved like Shinobi Konusu. It might very well be sheer coincidence, but there is no denying that the description offered here certainly fits at least a modern image of the shinobi in multiple ways. The criminal's disguise, the fact that they acted in small groups, their tactics of betrayal and withdrawal, and of course the inclusion of the word shinobi, which at first glance seems like definite proof that the ninja must somehow be related to these quote-unquote sneak thieves. However, the more common term used for these types of lawbreakers at the time made no mention of the word shinobi. Akuto, nowadays translated as simply bandits, was the preferred term at the time, and luckily there's an arguably even more interesting connection to be made between the Akuto and Japanese secret warfare, one that also introduces the shinobi as a mercenary. In search of mercenary activity within Japan, we fast forward to the Sengoku, or Warring States period of the 15th and 16th century, the most violent period in the country's history and obviously a fertile breeding ground for mercenary activity. During this period in Japanese history, the lower class Akuto, consisting of everything from mountain bandits to pirates, provided a large pool of potential, temporary allies for armies that required not only strength in numbers, but also soldiers who possessed certain skills that perhaps even a highly skilled samurai couldn't offer. Some of Japan's most famous samurai clans, from central and eastern Japan especially, employed these lower class mercenaries. The Takeda clan of Kai province, for example, was said to have employed around 500 so-called suppa, who acted mainly as spies under clan leader and samurai Takeda Shingen. The so-called Rappa, on the other hand, were mostly associated with the Kanto region's Hojo family and represented one of three types of undercover warriors serving the Hojo's army, each carrying out unique tasks. This included the Kuza, or literally grass troops, who, wouldn't you know it, hid in tall grass, gathering secret information about the enemy and attacking them if needed. The word shinobi, in noun form no less, was occasionally used to refer to Kuza troops as well. Kuza troops were usually drawn from the Hojo's own contingent of soldiers, unlike the Rappa troops, who were exclusively made up of Akuto mercenaries who carried out a very different set of tasks, as described in this section of the Hojo Godaiki of the 17th century. In here, the Rappa are said to have actually carried out murders in the name of their samurai employers, but are also described as sneaking into enemy territory, carrying out night attacks, and even abductions in an intelligent, almost professional manner. You know, shinobi type stuff. In short, the process of surveillance and intelligence gathering was left mainly to the Hojo's own troops, while the more violent, high-risk work was mostly left in the hands of mercenaries recruited from the ranks of the lower-class Akuto bandits. This goes to show that what we now consider to be the tasks of a shinobi did not necessarily originate from one specific group or class of warriors. Rather, jobs ranging from surveillance to assassinations could be carried out by people from all different kinds of social backgrounds and origins. Yet still, one part of the ninja myth is still missing. The one that claims that the skills of the ninja are somehow of hereditary nature. You know, secret knowledge passed down from one generation to the next over the course of multiple centuries. And there is no other place in Japan that is credited as frequently with being steeped in genuine shinobi history and tradition as these two, Iga and Kōka. In theory, focusing research on two specific, small neighboring regions seems ideal. Surely a treasure trove of contemporary sources detailing these areas' secret warfare practices would have been preserved for posterity. Well, especially in the case of Iga, that is unfortunately far from the truth. Iga province, and with it almost all historical records contained within it, were completely decimated during a 1581 invasion of the area led by the cruel, yet undeniably influential, Oda Nobunaga. This invasion was actually a continuation of the Iga Rebellion, which began 2 years earlier in 1579, when Nobunaga's son Nobukatsu suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of a collection of Iga forces known as the Iga Iki. Actually, the Iga Iki was more of an independent, local federacy, one with great knowledge of the local terrain, which Nobukatsu foolishly underestimated, leading to his unlikely defeat. This only filled his already pretty hateful father with even more rage, leading to the aforementioned destruction of Iga province, along with the Iga Iki and a wealth of historical records. Fortunately, accounts from outside of Iga detail several secret operations undertaken by the warriors of Iga both within and beyond their own borders, all of which in their own unique way provide some really interesting clues that do seem to support the supposed existence of Iga province's long-standing specialization in secret warfare during that era. The first of these accounts was the raid of Kazagi Castle in 1541, a pretty well-known event in Japanese history. This account is pretty much the whole package in terms of providing a story that feeds into the whole ninja myth, for several reasons. The word shinobi appears on several locations. Soldiers from both Iga and Kōka, both however referred to collectively under the name Iga-shu, are mentioned as participating in the raid. There is mention of the castle being entered in secret, and the whole operation also took place away from Iga and Kōka, which at first glance seems to feed into the whole Shinobi as mercenaries topic addressed just a couple of minutes ago as well. But perhaps most importantly, these reports about the Kazagi Castle raid are both contemporary and written from a neutral perspective, earning it a fair amount of points in the credibility department. Similar castle raids by Iga soldiers were reported at Takada Castle in 1556, Toichi Castle in 1560, and Sakaibe Castle in 1580. The raid of Toichi Castle in particular is noteworthy because it makes mention of a certain Shimotsuge no Kizaru, the leader of the Iga soldiers who would later make an appearance in the Manzen Shukai, the quote-unquote ninja bible. But more on that one in a bit. While all of the previous accounts described events that happened outside of Iga and Kōka, there is one more source, a manuscript describing the events of the famous Iga Rebellion of 1581. The manuscript contains some very interesting details about how the Iga soldiers operated during the rebellion, especially in terms of surveillance and information gathering. Notably, the men of Iga were advised to act in a respectful manner when extracting information from inhabitants of the Kōka region, despite the area having fallen under the control of Oda Nobunaga and fighting against the Iga army at that point, which really indicates a strong historic relationship between these two regions. These records sure do seem to confirm what is so often claimed in movies, TV shows, books, and even historic examinations of the topic. Our beloved ninja originate from these two regions, Iga and Kōka. Two places steeped in so much shinobi tradition that the rest of Japan simply couldn't compare when it came to producing the country's finest secret soldiers. But it's important to keep in mind that the Iga-shu, as they are often called in these ancient documents, wasn't exactly the kind of shinobi army that one might perhaps imagine, while their expertise in secret warfare is definitely acknowledged and even praised. The Iga-shu actually consisted mostly of more conventional soldiers, as you would find them in most other armies at the time. Soldiers that received similar amounts of praise to their stealthy counterparts in historical texts of that time period, by the way. Also, there's really no legitimate reason to assume that shinobi tradition was actually established in or even exclusive to Iga and Kōka specifically. Take for example a rebellion which took place at around the same time in Higo province, located right here on Japan's southernmost island of Kyushu, and far away from both Iga and Kōka. And yet, during the final act of the rebellion, soldiers of the local army reportedly pulled off multiple attacks and assassinations that, as Stephen Turnbull perfectly put it, would have been added to their tally of ninja operations, had they been performed by men from Iga. And regarding that whole mercenary thing, the fact that the aforementioned attacks at the hands of the Iga-shu mostly took place outside of Iga is not definite proof of them acting as mercenaries. All of these attacks took place really close to Iga province, located in an area of Japan that had always been both politically charged and strategically significant. This suggests that the Iga-shu's actions are more likely to have been driven by political considerations rather than purely financial gain. But regardless of whether Iga and Kōka were truly the sole source of shinobi activity in Japan, I do believe that a good amount of genuine shinobi tradition had already existed in these places by the mid-1500s. But actually, both regions became even more prominent in ninja lore following the death of Oda Nobunaga in 1582. The death of Japanese history's most infamous samurai lord came at the hands of the treacherous Akechi Mitsuhide. But for him, the death of Nobunaga wasn't enough. His next target was Nobunaga's family and his closest allies, including the future shogun Tokugawa Ieyasu, who at the time of Nobunaga's death found himself trapped in the city of Sakai. With little to no support on his side, he somehow had to make it to Okazaki, but the direct route there would have taken him straight through Kyoto, then under the control of Akechi Mitsuhide. Taking this route would have been a guaranteed death sentence for Ieyasu. It was one of his retainers, however, who then suggested a less risky, yet difficult alternative route, which would also take them straight through Iga province. The name of the man who suggested this alternative route? Hattori Hanzo. Hattori Hanzo, born sometime around 1542 into a family with roots in Iga province, proved to be one of Tokugawa Ieyasu's most trusted men after witnessing and likely participating in many of Ieyasu's successful military campaigns. He's also credited with ensuring Ieyasu's safe passage through Iga province along the aforementioned route, and historical records also document his valor during the 1590 Odawara campaign, which ultimately granted Tokugawa Ieyasu control of Edo Castle, the current imperial palace in Tokyo. The countless colorful retellings of Hattori Hanzo's bravery that followed over the following centuries cemented the man as a legendary figure in Japanese history, but perhaps even more so in ninja lore. And he owes much of his shinobi clout to a position given to him after Ieyasu had moved into Edo Castle. The story of Ieyasu's safe passage through their territory would serve as a great source of pride for the men and women of Iga province for generations to come. But they weren't the only ones who held on dearly to this historically important moment. Tokugawa Ieyasu himself was said to have never forgotten the debt that he owed to the people of Iga, and upon moving into Edo Castle, he felt that it would be the right choice to employ soldiers from Iga province to serve him as a hereditary guard unit. And who could be a better choice to lead this guard unit than, that's right, Hattori Hanzo. While Hanzo was carving out a path to becoming a shinobi legend, the people of Kōka weren't sitting idle either. For decades, they were thrust into the heart of crucial campaigns shaping the course of history, the most pivotal of which was undoubtedly the Battle of Sekigahara, which ultimately crowned Tokugawa Ieyasu as the first shogun of the Edo period. The men of Kōka played a vital role in Ieyasu's victory, most notably by heroically defending Fushimi, one of his most strategic bases, located south of Kyoto. This, along with their long history of loyalty to the Tokugawas, convinced the new shogun to offer them a prestigious place in the new capital city of Edo, just like it did with their neighbors from Iga province. Thus, 10 mounted Kōka samurai alongside 100 foot soldiers were introduced as the guards of Tokugawa Ieyasu himself, meaning that soldiers from both the supposed ninja birthplaces now stood united under the banner of the most powerful man in all of Japan. It was the beginning of the Edo period though, and things were about to be quite different from the turmoil and violence of the Sengoku period that preceded it. But somewhat ironically, it was during this newfound peace that the myth of hereditary shinobi skills so closely linked to the warriors of Iga and Kōka truly blossomed. While their duties in the capital now differed greatly from their past actions on the battlefield, their role remained crucial because the very foundation of the Edo period rested upon their watchful gaze. And not just towards regular citizens, but also towards the powerful daimyo, the regional lords who, no different from ordinary citizens, were subject to certain rules imposed by the new shogunate. The elite of Japan would therefore become intimately familiar with the guards from both Iga and Kōka, who were at the heart of the Tokugawa shogunate's extensive surveillance network. In fact, their importance to the Edo period's intelligence apparatus was so profound that by the late 17th century, the terms Igamono and Kōkamono were oftentimes used to describe anything and anyone even remotely associated with espionage or covert activities, even if there was no connection to those specific regions at all. Keep in mind though that information gathering during the Edo period was, for the most part, quite different from what happened during the Sengoku period. Gone were the days of high-octane infiltrations and castle burnings, because in this new age of relative peace, the focus shifted to maintaining stability rather than waging war. Think of it as keeping tabs on important figures, all conducted with the utmost discretion, of course. Missions that involved high-stakes infiltrations and sabotage were pretty much relegated to the annals of history. But this is also when the groundwork for the modern ninja and the enduring myth that surrounds him was laid. Because it was around this time when Japan finally found some time to focus on art and many different forms of entertainment, that a unique blend of curiosity, nostalgia, and hero worship for the warriors of old began to take hold. Consequently, the Edo period witnessed a surge in popular tales and legends. And the exploits of Iga and Kōka's sneaky ancestors would be no exception. This shift in culture aided the beginning of the creation of the modern ninja, which was also kickstarted in no small part by a number of ninjutsu manuals that started popping up here and there during the 17th century. Now, as time went on, the word ninjutsu took on many different meanings, depending on who you asked. But for the authors of these early ninjutsu manuals of the 17th century, ninjutsu represented one thing, and one thing only: the many techniques of secret warfare pioneered by the shinobi of a bygone era. Techniques that during the peaceful Edo period would have been under serious threat of being lost and forgotten forever. And so, inspired by Japanese military manuals of the past, these ninjutsu manuals sought to preserve these techniques for future generations, giving us a closer glimpse than ever before into the fascinating world of Japanese secret warfare. Take for example the highly influential Gunpo Chiyoshu. Supposedly based on the writings of Japan's first ever shogun Minamoto Yoritomo, this manual sought to educate its readers not only on things like why every daimyo should have spies serving under him and how to effectively deploy them, but it also provided some helpful advice when it came to how spies themselves should operate. One section, for example, explains what it takes to properly carry out a night attack, which more often than not included the clever use of certain tools, like torches, explosives, ladders, and caltrops. You will also learn how to effectively gag a prisoner. All in all, this manual contains some seriously good ninja content, but the biggest impact that the Gunpo Chiyoshu would ever have is to have much of its information included in a much larger, much more influential shinobi manual, compiled in 1676, the Bansen Shukai. This book does exactly what it says on the tin, literally translated as 10,000 rivers flowing together to form an ocean. The Bansen Shukai compiles the information found in several shinobi manuals that came before it, including the Gunpo Chiyoshu, and fuses it together with material from old Chinese military classics to form one very fascinating read. The Bansen Shukai actually maintained an incredibly low-key presence for multiple centuries, but since its rediscovery in the early 20th century, it has been hailed as the quote-unquote Ninja Bible, the definitive work on the topic of ninjutsu and everything related to it. Fittingly, the information found in Bansen Shukai was compiled by Fuchibayashi Yasutake, who hailed from none other than Iga province, further solidifying the link between the area and the shinobi. The Bansen Shukai is divided into 6 sections. Section number 1 carries the title Seishin, or Righteous Heart, and explains the morals behind conducting espionage and secret warfare in the pursuit of justice. Section number 2, titled Shochi, or Military Intelligence, tackles among other things the topic of how to deal with double agents. This information is followed up by 2 chapters about 2 different types of spies, named Yonin and Innin. The Yonin representing a spy whose physical presence is known to the enemy, while the Innin represents the more stealthy approach. You know, being under cover of darkness and all that good stuff. The 5th section, called Tenji, or the Times of Heaven, brings astronomy, astrology, and divination into the mix, and to close things out, there is the final section, entitled Ninki, or Secret Weapons. The Bansen Shukai also contains some interesting sections about the use of medicine, something that even now is considered to be an integral part of a true shinobi's inventory. And with Kōka in particular being one of the earliest centers for pharmaceuticals in Japan, an interesting connection can certainly be made there as well. What really gained the Bansen Shukai widespread attention, starting in the early 20th century though, was the aforementioned section about secret weapons, which included objects like the famous smoke bombs, the collapsible ladder, and the Mizugumo, or water spider, which allowed its user to walk on water, like some kind of ninja Jesus. But as influential as the Bansen Shukai eventually turned out to be, it certainly wasn't the only ninjutsu manual to leave its mark, because it is actually one part of the revered Big Three ninjutsu manuals from its era. The second of these, 1681's Shoninki, stands out for a couple of reasons. Notably, it is the earliest known source for a famous shinobi technique, using a sword guard to climb walls, and it also mentions some now essential ninja tools like grappling hooks, the wakizashi or short sword, and perhaps most notably recommends dark colored clothing in a section on disguises. Rounding out the big three is Shinobi no Hiden, or Ninpiden. This one allegedly boasts a legendary author, Hattori Hanzo, who passed away more than 100 years before Shinobi no Hiden's release in 1700. But while Hanzo gets the credit here, it is suspected that it was an unnamed man with roots in, again, Iga province that created this one. Shinobi no Hiden starts off with a historical introduction before unleashing a treasure trove of ninja tool illustrations, along with valuable intel on who to target for information gathering, and some truly ingenious silent walking techniques. Beyond the big three, there was also the Ninjutsu Ogiden, notable for connecting ninjutsu to Japanese Buddhism and its rituals. The most famous of which has to be the use of mystical hand signs, known in Japanese as kuchi-in, which, as their name implies, consisted of a total of 9 different gestures, each one connected to a kanji character and its pronunciation, said out loud by the user while performing said gestures. A ritual of Chinese origin, the kuchi-in were supposed to erect a sort of invisible barrier around one's body, protecting it from evil spirits. This old and relatively simple religious practice was of course turned into something else entirely, hundreds of years later in popular media. But it's really interesting to see the humble origins of this now iconic ninja skill. All of these manuals, in their own unique ways, now offer us a glimpse into what the techniques of a shinobi known as ninjutsu might actually have looked like. But while the authors of these manuals were hard at work trying to preserve these techniques for future generations, on the streets of Edo, the word ninjutsu stood for something else entirely. No castle infiltrations, no stealth techniques to be found here. Rather, ninjutsu represented something that the Japanese of the Edo period were absolutely obsessed with: the supernatural. And we're not just talking religious hand gestures here. No, we're talking magic. A good 300 years before the global ninja craze, the flourishing of art and culture brought the word ninjutsu into the Japanese mainstream. The woodblock prints, the kabuki plays, the novels, they all played their part in introducing ninjutsu to the masses. But to them, the practitioners of ninjutsu were colorful characters, well versed in the field of sorcery with the ability to shapeshift into animals or even turn invisible. There was, for example, Tenchiku Tokube, a popular ninjutsu user known to Japanese kabuki theater enjoyers especially, who could disappear at will and shapeshift into a toad using so-called Gama no Jutsu, or toad techniques. And the Japanese seem to love the idea of turning into a toad, because the same technique was featured in the tale of Jiraiya, who possessed the ability to ride, or sometimes even turn into a toad, just like Tokube. Jiraiya's adversary, Orochimaru, by the way, could change into a snake. Pretty sick. And while we are on the topic of kabuki, a possible source of inspiration for the modern ninja's black attire can also be found here. It is believed that stagehands called kuroko, tasked with moving around scenery and assisting actors with changing their costumes, served as a source of inspiration due to their completely black costume and concealed faces, which were supposed to make them invisible to the audience. An even more likely source of inspiration, however, were these types of illustrations, created by famous artists like the great Hokusai and Kunisada. It's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that these were meant to be illustrations of shinobi, therefore being proof of their historical connection to the black costume. These illustrations, though, were never meant to depict shinobi. Rather, what we're looking at here are either regular old martial artists doing cool stuff, or opportunistic assassins that are not to be confused with actual practitioners of ninjutsu as outlined in historic records and manuals. To find the first real connection between a black costume and the shinobi, we have to fast forward almost 100 years from when these illustrations were created. Starting in 1909, newspaper reporter and author Ito Gingetsu introduced several new, very important elements to the ninjutsu practitioner in a series of often confusing and sometimes even self-contradictory books. Before completely contradicting his own statements by describing his ninjutsuja, as he liked to call them, as talented castle infiltrators, he made the case that ninjutsu actually had nothing to do with infiltration techniques. To him, the nin in ninjutsu was indeed all about endurance, and to quote the man himself, having the ability to maintain one's discipline and focus under the most brutal and challenging of conditions or circumstances. By intense perseverance and effort, one's tanren, or physical and mental strength, is forged. To achieve absolute discipline and focus, Ito recommended in his first book a 4-step training program, which included several breathing techniques and different methods to move lightly or quickly. The trademark sideways walk of the ninja, done by crossing one leg over the other, is mentioned for the first time in Ito's series of books, with accompanying drawings that clearly portrayed a ninjutsusha wearing a black costume, marking the very first time that an actual ninjutsu specialist was linked with this sort of attire. The ninja is really beginning to take shape at this point. Oh, and speaking of ninja, I mean literally the word ninja, Ito also seems to have been the first to ever use almost that exact reading upon returning to the topic of ninjutsu almost 3 decades later in his 1937 book titled Gendaijin no Ninjutsu, where he glossed the 2 kanji letters as ninja. It seems that somehow this reading caught on and over time developed into the current day reading ninja, which actually didn't appear in a Japanese English dictionary until 1974. Ito Gingetsu certainly did a lot in terms of shaping the ninja into what he is today, but he wasn't alone. Fujita Seiko took the concept of nin as endurance to a whole nother level, because unlike Ito Gingetsu, this guy claimed to be a master of ninjutsu himself. Historical records indicate that Fujita's grandfather's supposed ancestral connection to a historical figure from Kōka called Wada Koremasa is questionable at best. But regardless, he passed on to his grandson a school of ninjutsu, the Wadaha Kokaryu, along with its secret knowledge, which came printed on a couple of ancient scrolls. And in his 1936 book Ninjutsu Hiroku, Fujita Seiko aimed to finally share this secret knowledge with the rest of the world. Or the rest of Japan, I should say. Now, why would Fujita share his grandfather's valuable knowledge with his fellow countrymen? Well, because he was a patriot, of course, and with a war against China, and later the Second World War, right around the corner, he saw ninjutsu as a potential way of tipping the scale in his country's favor. Now, the information presented in Ninjutsu Hiroku is actually far from secret. Most of it was lifted straight from the Bansen Shukai. And yet, the book makes for an interesting read, with Fujita presenting the information in a way that makes it applicable to modern warfare. For the first few sections of the book, that is, because after that, the book's focus shifts to Fujita himself and the crazy stunts that he claimed to be able to pull off. This included eating glass and roof tiles, which he said was part of a learning process, required to withstand torture and training the body to resist poisoning. In terms of assisting Japan's war effort with his knowledge of ninjutsu, Fujita would be gravely disappointed. There was simply no time during the war to train soldiers in the art of ninjutsu, let alone letting them chew on roof tiles. And for the rest of the 1940s, the samurai instead of the shinobi would remain as the role model for the countless Japanese soldiers who were forced to risk their lives for their country. If nothing else in this video so far convinced you that the ninja is a post-war phenomenon more than anything, this complete absence of shinobi imagery during Japan's World War II campaign should do the job. Because back in the 30s and 40s, the Japanese government was practically tripping over itself to use every bit of its long history with war as a potential propaganda tool, all in an attempt to fire up the Japanese public for the war effort. And yet, the image of the shinobi was ignored by the Japanese almost entirely. Until after the war, that is. Once again, just like 300 years earlier, it would be the period of peace that followed years of war that would help push ninjutsu into the limelight. But this time, instead of kabuki shows and war manuals, it was the tourism and film industries that made sure that the terms shinobi and ninja became household names. Not only in Japan, but this time across the globe. The foundation for Japan's post-war ninja craze was laid where else but in Iga, an area where shinobi activity was supposedly rooted so deeply, yet had lain pretty much dormant for 3.5 centuries at that point. And wouldn't you know it, it was yet again a man with Iga roots who, after reading the Banzen Shukai, sought to introduce the shinobi to a wider audience, but this time as a tourist magnet. In 1951, Okuse Heishichiro, with the help of none other than the unforgettable Fujita Seiko, created the Ninjutsu Wonder Museum exhibition, complete with ninjutsu demonstrations by Fujita himself and showcasing both the quote-unquote secret writings that Fujita inherited, as well as many of the weapons and other ninjutsu equipment described within them. These weapons and tools in particular proved to be very popular with visitors. So much so that a museum in Iga dedicated to the area's extensive samurai history eventually received a permanent display area called Ninjutsu-kan or Ninjutsu Hall as well, followed up in 1970 by the purpose-built Iga-ryu Ninja Museum, which you can still visit to this day. At Okuse's request, the whole Iga area underwent somewhat of a transformation when monuments in honor of local shinobi heroes like Hattori Hanzo were erected. That and a number of notice boards located at the sites of former castles and battlefields really made it seem like Iga was a place where shinobi history could be found around every corner. Okuse's next masterstroke came in 1956 when, with the help of a local railway company, he released a handy 26-page booklet titled Ninjutsu, containing a map of all ninja-related sites around Iga, as well as a wealth of information about ninjutsu and its practitioners. It also included what must be the first photographs ever taken of someone posing in a now iconic black ninja attire that we all recognize, and even featured photographs of various custom-made shinobi tools and weapons, which further enriched the experience and truly brought the world of the ninja to life. Okuse certainly took a lot of creative liberties when portraying ninjutsu history in this booklet, such as the creation of a hierarchical ranking system for shinobi that wasn't historically accurate, but has since become widely adopted in ninja lore. Despite all this, Okuse's contributions shouldn't be underestimated. He effectively crafted a believable world for the shinobi to inhabit, and in that, he achieved remarkable success. It's really no coincidence that people were so captivated by Okuse's writings at exhibitions. If we choose to view the ninja as an invention, then there is no doubt that Okuse should be credited as the inventor. He also really put Iga on the map and made sure that the region would forever remain synonymous with shinobi history from that point on. But if that wasn't enough to convince you that Okuse made the ninja what he is today, well, believe me, this man's influence extended far beyond just exhibitions and booklets. It was the 1962 film Shinobi no Mono, which really cemented Okuse's vision of the shinobi in the public consciousness. Based on a book written by novelist Murayama Tomoyoshi with the assistance of Okuse Heishichiro, the movie solidified the iconic image of the shinobi, delivering pretty much everything you would expect. The now classic black garb, thrilling martial arts fights, and a connection to the real-life Iga and Kōka regions, serving as a historical grounding which lent an air of intrigue and legitimacy that made the film even more captivating than it already was, while also serving as additional advertisement for ninjutsu-related tourism in Iga, of course. The movie turned out to be a massive success, and over the course of the next 4 years, the studio that produced Shinobi no Mono pumped out a total of 7 sequels. The shinobi now had their very own blockbuster movie franchise, and countless imitators were quick to attempt to cash in on the hype as well, cementing the shinobi's place in pop culture and elevating them to a level comparable to Japan's revered samurai, who had been a mainstay in Japanese storytelling for such a long time. On the television side of things, you also had shows like Onmitsu Kenji, which further helped ingrain the now firmly established shinobi image in the minds of the Japanese. But in terms of introducing the rest of the world to the concept of the ninja, no other movie would be quite as important as the 1967 James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice. This movie was shot mainly in Japan and actually includes the ninja as one of its central themes. Ninja that had been altered to suit Western tastes, that is, but ninja nonetheless. Oh, and speaking of which, the word ninja, first coined as explained earlier by Ito Gingetsu, seems to somehow have become the preferred term at that point. Perhaps in an attempt to make pronunciation easier for a foreign audience? But even in Shinobi no Mono, which is said to have greatly inspired You Only Live Twice, by the way, the word ninja can be heard on many occasions. But moving on. Besides the ever-charismatic Sean Connery,
I love you.
The literal star of the show in You Only Live Twice was a certain weapon utilized by the movie's ninja. A weapon that is nowadays as much of a part of the ninja as his black attire. The Shūriken. Now, the Shūriken does have a place in actual history, but the original version that appeared in documents from as early as the late 1600s was closer to a sort of steel dart, rather than what we refer to in the West as a ninja star. But neither these steel darts, nor the star-shaped version ever made an appearance in any of the ninjutsu manuals that we explored earlier. Instead, it is the aforementioned 1936 Fujita Seiko book Ninjutsu Hiroku, which first introduced the idea of the shuriken in its now famous shape to a wider audience. The book contains drawings of what appear to be precursors to the modern design, one being cross-shaped and the other being an 8-pointed star, which is already pretty damn close to what we are now familiar with. Fujita is said to have been inspired in coming up with these designs, thanks to either a set of real-life objects owned by the last Tokugawa shogun Yoshinobu, or by a combat manual belonging to the Seigoryu school of martial arts, which even provided an illustration of what looks like an early version of the modern shuriken design. The idea of Fujita's shuriken was then revisited when he collaborated with Okusei Heishichiro in creating the famous Ninjutsu booklet of 1956. The idea then quickly spread, appearing in several manga, and of course in the Okusei-influenced book and movie Shinobi no Mono, before You Only Live Twice introduced a gaijin audience to the star-shaped ninja weapon, which is nowadays almost as famous as the samurai's katana sword. With even a trademark weaponry of the ninja making an appearance in Western movies of the late 60s, there's only one question left. Whatever happened to the supernatural aspect of ninjutsu? Because despite the many fictional elements that were introduced in order to spice him up a bit, the shinobi that appeared in all the books and movies of the 60s especially was for the most part pretty grounded and at least somewhat realistic. But the supernatural part of the ninja myth actually lived on, and as time went on became a permanent ingredient of the shinobi recipe as well. You know, all the shapeshifting and magic hand sign shenanigans. Let's just cut to the chase, we are all thinking about Naruto here. And yes, Jiraiya was based on the aforementioned toad magic shapeshifter of the same name. Wrapping things up, I know that this final part of the video especially made it seem like the ninja is nothing more than a commercial fabrication. An invention of tradition that has never existed and has misled countless people about what secret warfare in feudal Japan actually looked like. And to some degree, that is absolutely true. But the reasons why I wouldn't go as far as calling the shinobi, the ninja, or whatever you want to call him, a pure fabrication is the simple fact that while the ninja as a whole is certainly fictitious, all the elements that make the ninja who he is, many of his abilities, his toolkit, his weaponry, and to some extent his origins, are all at least based on historic fact, on techniques, places, and people that actually existed. In that sense, the ninja should be viewed as perhaps the most clever way of promoting Japanese history and culture to the whole world that ever existed. I mean, how often have you encountered something related to history that is that cool and marketable? Well, except for the samurai, I guess. Japan really knows how to sell its history. The mere fact that you're watching this video right now is proof of just how clever and marketable the idea of the ninja really is. For each and every one of you, there is probably a good reason why you clicked on this video. That one piece of popular media that made you curious about where the true origins of the ninja lie. Or maybe you're just here because you enjoyed some of my previous videos. And in that case, I'm extremely flattered. Unfortunately though, this is where we'll have to finish today's story. But I'm curious, what was your first encounter with the concept of the ninja? Mine must have been the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Great show, but did you know that in large parts of Europe what we got was a heavily censored version called Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles? The 90s were weird, man. Anyway, let me finish this video with a shout out to my dear Patreon supporters listed here, including Bobby Wu, Javier Soravia, Capybara Chuck, Turom, Daniel Dees, RK0, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Solo Solito, and Charred B-Man. And to everyone who decided to watch this one all the way until the end, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.